Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 63, The Echo Tree. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a quick announcement. My wife actually got laid off from work this month, which is a big, frustrating bummer for a whole bunch of reasons. So she's on the job hunt, I'm keeping an eye out as well, but going into September, this channel now has a lot more heavy lifting to do in terms of our household income, so if you're able, I would appreciate it so much if you'd consider joining my Patreon. If you support at $5 a month, you'll get my videos ad-free, and you'll also get them a few days early. It's been a few months since I've been able to build up enough of a buffer to deliver the videos early, but my nose has been to the grindstone throughout August trying to get ahead of schedule, and now I actually do feel comfortable enough that I can deliver that reward of early videos once again. Additionally, I've got some D&D PDFs coming to the Patreon soon. $3 a month gets you access to those, and $10 a month gets your name in the credits of those PDFs. And I've got another video project I'm working on as well, and your name will also be in the credits for those, but more on that another day. I also have a Ko-fi if you're not interested in signing up for a Patreon, but would still like to give a one-time donation, and you can still get rewards like commissioning videos for this channel. And if you can't lend any financial support right now, that is honestly not a problem at all. I totally get it. Believe me. So if you can share this video with a friend or leave a comment, that all makes a big difference as well. Once again, thank you so much for everything. My audience is absolutely incredible. I hate having to ask for anything additional because I don't want you to feel like I take you for granted at all. You don't owe me anything. But if you are able and willing to lend any support, it would be enormously appreciated. If not, I totally get it. Now that that big announcement is out of the way, let's get on with the show. For this episode, Liam is Skyping in, and as a note, this episode actually has a lot of audio glitching in the first part. It has nothing to do with the Skype, I don't think. Everyone's mics just keep cutting out all at once for some reason. It sounds like at least once every minute or two, the entire sound of the episode drops out for like a moment. It sounds like whoever's talking is hiccuping, but it's constant. So I do have clips in this video, but each of the clips is going to be pretty short. That sound issue is fairly persistent throughout. As the game opens, the party has realized that the hut they're standing near is probably the hut of Wodena, which Garmelie warned them to avoid. And they fully acknowledge that they all want to go towards the hut, despite the fact that they know they shouldn't. And they literally have to talk themselves out of approaching the hut because they want to go interact with it, even though they have no good reason to do so. We've been talking about this a lot as we've been covering the Feywild Arc, but this just continues to be so funny to me. When you look at forums for GM advice or questions in YouTube comments, so many game masters ask things like, how can I get my players to interact with my game world? Matt appears to have the opposite problem. His players have this compulsive need to check every box and explore every NPC he set up for them, at least in the Feywild, even when they know they have no reason to do so. It's really hilarious. As they leave the hut, the hag's door slams shut and Pike's form flickers and fades. The party asks whether it looks like she just got stolen away or something, and Matt clarifies, no, it's like what happened under the temple in Whitestone. The magic was disrupted and her connection was severed. Still, that was a very fair question on part of the players. If Matt was trying to push his players to interact with Wodena, then having her capture Pike's essence or her soul or something would be a great way to make that happen. But in truth, he just needed to get Pike off the field for the game because Ashley's not here, so he tied Pike's absence to Wodena's magic dispelling ability, the same way Wodena briefly neutralized the broom's magic. So the party leaves the hut behind. They walk through the muck for a while, and eventually they spot a pair of trolls in the mud ahead, munching on a creature who got caught in the bog. And that's a really nice piece of environmental storytelling. Creatures here can get caught in the bog, and then other predators can come and devour them. The trolls hear them approaching and dive into the muck, which is very frightening and super cool. I love the idea of a challenge where if you stand still, you might get stuck in the mud, but if you move, you might draw the attention of the trolls swimming beneath the mud. This is great encounter design. It deals with an issue that I often have in 5e, where players plant their feet and don't move throughout the entire fight. But it also invites some really cool mechanics with the submerged trolls. But of course, we don't see any of that play out because the party does not stay to fight the trolls, because why would they? Instead, they just scurry up the trees to hide. Grog is really reluctant to go up there because he can't picture how he's going to be able to swing from tree to tree as they traverse through the bog. He's not nimble enough for that. But then Keyleth offers to turn him into a gorilla, and that he is 1000% down for. I have found that players love being turned into animals. It's a ton of fun for them. And a player like Travis could be very easily getting bored when his character isn't able to contribute to the game in any meaningful way. Since they're not currently fighting anything, there's no strategy to discuss, and there are no comedic bits to interact with. Plus, he's also under the weather at the moment, so he might not even have a ton of energy to do bits. But now that he's been turned into a gorilla, he's having a ball. He can participate in any scene and express the novelty of being able to give a thumbs up with his foot or do a fairly impressive gorilla noises in body language. Also, side note, gorillas in D&D also have an intelligence of 6, so Grog is as smart as he was before, which isn't just funny, but it also frees Travis up from having to change Grog's characterization in any meaningful way. And of course, the party jokes about not being able to tell the difference. It's just like that episode of season 1 of The Simpsons where everyone thinks Homer is Bigfoot. This may be a strange point to compare it to, but I just started watching The Simpsons for the first time. Never seen it before, it's pretty good. Vex flies with Vax on her broom, Keyleth becomes a giant eagle and carries Scanlan, Percy drinks a potion of climbing, and Grog is, as established, a gorilla. So the party begins traversing through the trees and making their way towards the large tree in the distance, the cancerous tree in the heart of the swamp. Since the other players are flying, but Percy and Grog are interacting with the slimy tree branches, Matt has those two players roll 3 athletics checks each, though he gives them both advantage because they're climbing abilities right now. They both do great, and so they are all able to travel through the trees without issue. They get close to the cancerous tree and they fly around it and do some recon. They can see that the black muck of the bog is actually oozing out of this tree like sap, and occasionally reaches out with a branch to grab something, so the tree itself is also more animated than most trees might be. They start taking a short rest in the tree branches to see what else they can observe before going into the mansion for the night. However, as they're in the trees taking their short rest, the branches begin to sag the longer they're in there, and try to push them off and drop them into the mud. Percy and Keyleth actually land in the tar, and so Scanlan creates the mansion and they all scurry inside. They can still come and go through the magic door and still do the recon they want to do, but they just cannot stay and linger in these branches. This is a great detail from Matt. The players had been resting in trees throughout his campaign ever since the beginning of the Whitestone arc, and they've done it at least once already in the Feywild. It makes perfect sense that they would do the same thing in the bog, either for a short or long rest. So by having the swamp prevent the ability to take a rest in the branches, Matt is robbing his players of a shortcut they've been taking a lot, and it's really smart. You don't want to do this all the time because then the players will feel like you're punishing them for a sound strategy, but every once in a while, finding unique ways to counter their go-to strategies is great because it forces the players to get more creative. The twins bring Percy a log, and he and Keyleth make swamp shoes, so they can all walk on the swamp the way Vex can. They won't be as fast as her, but the hope is that they at least won't sink into the swamp as easily.
I'm gonna inspire him once with an inspirational quote. You have to look through the rain to see the rainbow.
I gotta leave. I can't
So I might have to take a -10 now for that. That actually removes
Hey.
-10.
Hey, pal.
Fortune cookie, where'd you get that?
Hey, pal. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. If plan A doesn't work, there's still 25 letters left in the alphabet.
Oh, wow. That's 3 inspirations.
This is
you've
borderline
burn that
Lisa
page.
Frank quotes here. This is.
Kill him.
Can I remove that extra 2 from your charisma?
Yeah, all that reading finally goes to shit.
It was my footprints you
It's
saw.
proficiency bonus plus proficiency plus dex. That's
Yes,
right.
go for it.
All right.
I was carrying you all along.
Hate you. I hate everything you stand for.
That footprints joke completely cracks me up every time I watch it. I'm just like Laura in that moment every time. Now, Liam probably doesn't want to do a ton of role-playing through Skype since that's not a very conducive format for that, so he has Vax excuse himself to go rest his nether regions, since sitting on a flying broom when you don't have a fancy seat, and when you have male reproductive organs, would probably be incredibly unpleasant. To be honest, this has actually always been my issue with the flying broom in any franchise. I cannot imagine how it's comfortable for anyone, so I can't fathom how anyone could consider it part of their fantasy to be like a witch flying on a broom or whatever. Like, obviously it is something other people think would be fun. Kiki's Delivery Service, Wicked, like people, Harry Potter, people imagine flying on brooms and think it's cool and fun. I just can't get on board with that personally. But once other players start leaving the mansion to go do recon, Vax sits on the door jamb with his bag of ice, down there, waiting to be useful if needed, but otherwise happy to sit on the sidelines. Keyleth swan dives into the muck, turns into an earth elemental, and swims down and finds the soil beneath the bog, and then thanks to her earth elemental ability to phase through rock like Kitty Pryde, she glides under the soil under the tree. Her tremor sense confirms that there aren't that many creatures near the tree, at least around the outside, but every once in a while she feels a big twitch, and she guesses that might be the tree lashing out at things, since it is alive and somewhat animated. She returns to the mansion, and everyone finds that Grog has completely smashed up the kitchen. His goal is to upgrade his gauntlets, because he saw that Vax's vestige awakened and gained a new ability. It unlocked wings, so now the party knows that the vestiges have a different ability that they can each unlock, or at least they assume so. So he's trying to use violence to unlock the power of the gauntlets. When they don't level up, he thinks maybe violence has to be done to people instead. The servants are spectral and he can't punch them, so he has them bring him another cow, since he did punch a cow before when he was trying to get blood for Craven Edge. In fact, that scenario was very similar to this one, come to think of it. But he beats the hell out of this cow, and it just doesn't really take any damage. It yelps in alarm, but not really in pain. So Scanlan becomes a Triceratops and allows Grog to wallop him. But there doesn't seem to be any changes to the gauntlets. Scanlan tries the same, singing while attacking with Mythcarver, but again, nothing happens. And with that, the party retires for their long rest. Vex watches out the door for a while, and she sees a few trees vanish. Something disrupted them, or they just dropped, and now the trees are gone from the canopy. Weird. We don't get an explanation for this, but I suspect this is something the party might have had to deal with if they'd taken a long rest in the tree branches, since it is distinctly a very large section of trees, too large to be like Ukurat resting on top of them or something like that. Vex brings this to Keyleth's attention and asks her about it, and Marisha once again gets a terrible roll with her opal dice that treated her so poorly in the last episode as well. However, Percy is working on theories. The big tree doesn't have the normal things a tree needs to live, like sunlight, but it's clearly thriving, so it is feeding on something.
Life needs things to live.
That's so poetic.
Keyleth returns to the muck and floats in it like a sensory deprivation tank. This episode is full of fantastic visuals. I forgot about a lot of these. And then she casts Commune with Nature in the muck and asks some questions. What is fueling the tree? The answer is Saundor. She tries to ask what the tree's weakness is, but Matt says the spell can't answer that one. Basically, there is no answer. So he rules that this doesn't consume one of the 3 questions she gets to ask, and that's actually really nice of him. Likewise, she tries to ask more about who Saundor is, but again, that's beyond the limitations of the spell. It doesn't grant that kind of specific knowledge about individuals. So again, that doesn't count towards her questions. She does confirm with her other questions that the tree is also definitely feeding on the other plants in the swamp. So Matt is drawing a distinction between whether the tree is consuming the life around it and what is actually fueling the tree. And finally, she confirms that the cancerous tree is more than just a tree, as they all kind of imagined. The spell ends and they pull her back up into the mansion, and at this point, the players are all talking over each other with ideas for how they can neutralize or purify the tree and retrieve Fenthris, the magic bow they came here for. Normally, I love scenes like this, but the glitching audio makes it kind of a rough watch this time. Don't worry, we're getting a pretty good one in the next episode, although that one also has some technical issues. They were dealing with a few technical issues around this time. However, of note in this scene is that they'd start to wish like they'd done more research into the history of Fenthris before coming. Which is not the first time they've said that. This just confirms my thesis for the Feywild Arc that the party feels wildly unprepared, since they keep trying to get more intelligence about Fenthris and all the dangers they can expect. I also wonder if this just might come from the fact that they can't retreat or call their friends since they are now in a separate plane of existence. Maybe they don't feel this way all the time because there's sort of this imaginary safety net, and now that they're removed from that, they're feeling that absence. But speaking of those friends, Matt reminds them that Allura did do research on Fenthris, and she told them about her findings before they all came to the Feywild. And he asks, "Did you write that down?" And the party scours their notes, and they just cannot find anything, so he just shakes his head and says, "You guys." Because, as we've been discussing over the past few months, Matt cares about his players taking notes way more than he cares about them remembering their mechanics or whatever. But Vex makes the argument that her character was listening intently, Laura just never finished writing down anything they were told by Allura. And this is something that you'll run into a lot in your games. Your players will insist that their characters would remember something better than they would. And generally, I happen to agree with them. I think Matt handles this the right way. He gives the players time to check their notes, but only once it's clear that nobody has any notes of any detail. Marisha seems to have just a couple of terms that don't make any sense, and everyone else has way less information than her. Only at that point does he call for a history check. Because at a certain point, you do just have to move on, and resolving it with a die roll is still reasonable. Not just because, yes, you can make the argument the player characters would remember something better than the players did, but also because there is still a chance of failure. And hopefully this encourages them to take better notes in the future, but you also don't want to completely punish them if they were so engrossed in your story that they forgot to take good notes. The die roll still means failures on the table, but it also means that it is still possible for them to figure out what information they had and then lost. That being said, your mileage may vary, and it also depends a lot on your players, their individual playstyles, and their specific needs. With a 17 history check, Matt reminds him that there was once an archfey who wielded Fenthris, but he was betrayed. His heart was corrupted, and he became the center of this disease that consumes the bog. The party deduces that this archfey must be Saundor, and he's probably still in the center of the tree. They break for their long rest, but Vax takes Vex aside so they can finally talk about what happened back in Singorn. Vax doesn't put any stock in what their father thinks, although he is always glad to see their father get irritated by something. But Vax noticed how delighted Vex was by Percy's grand gesture, but Vax is worried that Vex doesn't see how great she is without that validation of nobility. And by that validation of nobility, I mean from Percy and, arguably, from their father. He tells her how cool she is and just hopes that she can see it in herself as well. Liam also does this thing whenever he Skypes in for an episode where he really makes a conscious effort to match his eye lines to the player he's talking to as if he's actually in the room with them. I don't know how the players feel about it looking at the screen, but it plays really well from the audience's perspective. It's a neat little trick. Now, it must be really tough to try to do an emotional scene like that when you're Skyping in, but this is more or less the first chance he's had to do so. Vex got the title during a live show in episode 60. Then in episode 61, they were wandering through the forest and dealing with magic instruments and werewolves and pixies. They did take a long rest in that episode, but they didn't have the mansion, so they were camped out in the wilderness. They were keeping watch and looking out for pixies. It was not exactly a quiet moment like this one. Episode 62 was another live show, and Liam wasn't even able to attend. So this is the first quiet moment he's really had to discuss this with Vex. It's also possible he's just been thinking about this and has come to a different conclusion over time. Maybe he never planned to say anything, but after a few weeks he realized, hang on, wait a minute, I'm now seeing this interaction with Percy and Vex and my father through a new light, where she seems to be looking for validation that this title provided her. This interaction with Vax also reminds Vex that she actually hasn't thanked Percy properly, so in the morning she does just that. And he also affirms that titles don't change who you are, which is very much along the lines of what he was discussing with her in the mansion the night before he even gave her the title when they met Vex and Vax's father. And he does casually mention that the whole Grey Hunt aspect of her title is something they'll have to discuss later if they survive the Feywild. Anyway, the vague plan they have is to present themselves to Saundor as fanboys of the tree, so the good talkers like Scanlan can try to open the situation diplomatically. At the base of the tree, Scanlan calls them Saundor's devotees, but there is no response. Keyleth speaks with the plants and says they've come here to see Saundor's heart, and that seems to have been the right thing to say, because the tree opens for them. As soon as they enter, Keyleth feels Saundor's presence. He's watching them. They hear his voice, and he says, "I know you. The moment you touched my sickness, I knew you." Vines slither and coalesce around them, and then part to reveal Saundor, an elf-like being made of foliage with very little humanity left, descending from the ceiling with vines attached to his back. The audio is really bad in this section, so I'll just read you some of his quotes that I think are interesting. "Sweet, broken Vexalia, unwanted daughter, unproven ally, selfish and cruel. You drive those whom you would call family into danger and death for your own gain. I understand you." He references one of the worst moments of her life, when he refers to a moment in her past when she had a dagger in her hand and a body at her feet. He calls her a killer. Now, this is a reference to a piece of backstory Laura wrote and shared with Matt during their pre-stream games, the origin of how Vex got Trinket. In that story, Vex was on her own, Vax was not with her, and she was captured by poachers. She managed to escape her cage, and she killed 2 of the poachers. These were the first lives she had ever taken, and she'd done so pretty easily. It had come so naturally to her that it actually scared her. She sat and cried and processed the murders she just committed. Then she approached the injured bear the poachers had been tormenting and killed it to put it out of its misery, only then to discover that the bear was a mother protecting a cub. Vex took the cub with her, adopting him as Trinket. Now, in the cartoon adaptation, Vex and Vax are together and they don't kill the poachers. It's not a moral question that's presented because, honestly, I think the creators knew that if we saw these poachers were abusing a mama bear, we would cheer Vex on as she drove a blade into their bellies and slit their throats. But here in this game, Matt remembers this moment. I mean, to be fair, they'd actually just uploaded this story to Nerdist like a week before this game, so it was probably fresh on their minds anyway. But more than that, Matt understood what this story meant to Laura. It's a story about Vex's first kills, and it doesn't matter whether they were righteous, justified kills. She still took lives when she was fairly young, and she did so fairly easily. What matters to Vex and to Laura was that the killing came almost as second nature, and that's what Saundor preys upon in this scene, weaponizing this moment from her past, saying, "You are a killer, run as you may." He's preying upon Vex's insecurities about her own misdeeds, but he also calls her "my dear, sweet Vexalia," and offers to grant her many gifts. At this point, the party drops the pretense that they are Saundor's admirers, but Saundor doesn't leap into battle with them as soon as they do that. Instead, he clarifies that he just wants to be understood. He says he's a lot like Vex, but she has companionship. But his companions have left him. Every time anyone has gotten close, they betrayed him. He says he just wants to be understood. He just wants a companion. And Vex says she does understand him, and she does start to feel bad for him. He offers power to protect her friends and to protect her home. All he asks for in return is her heart.
My heart is someone else's. And I pull my bow.
If you listen closely, you can hear 100,000 shippers gasp and squeal and ascend into heaven. She fires the arrow, and this sets off the encounter. Matt describes more black sludge pouring from Saundor's mouth and the vines reaching out and handing him Fenthris. His wooden armor also grows around him and hides his face. I love that as a metaphor, by the way. 2 dead trees within the tree spring to life and jump to their root feet and become enemy combatants. And what's fascinating is that Laura feels guilty about this. Partially because she just initiated initiative, which is very much unlike her. She is not like Vax or Percy or Grog. She's not the one who fires the starting gun most of the time. But also, it does seem like she actually feels bad for Saundor. So let's talk about Saundor and what makes him such an interesting and compelling villain. Because he starts this scene at kind of a narrative disadvantage as far as being an interesting character is concerned. Because he's just the bad guy at the end of the dungeon, the final boss in his arena, waiting for the heroes to arrive. That is an extremely passive character. He literally cannot reach out and influence the rest of the Feywild thanks to the rivers of the Gilded Run, trapping his corruption within the Shademirk Bog. So a lot of my usual recommendations for what makes a great D&D villain don't apply because thanks to the structure of this story, he's unable to react to the heroes getting close to his domain. He's unable to be proactive. He's not even working on any evil plans that impact anyone besides the people who enter his swamp. And even then, it seems like a lot of them will just get eaten by trolls or other monsters before they ever even actually reach him and get tempted to join Saundor. This is always kind of a strange choice on Matt's part because Saundor as a villain cannot really be foreshadowed in any way throughout the Feywild Arc because he's literally partitioned off into his own little lair. But this decision serves Saundor on a thematic level, because he is literally isolated off on his own. Next, he seemingly knows everything about the heroes as soon as they step into his muck. This helps solve a problem we sometimes struggle with when crafting villains who are supposed to be masterminds, or want to be seen that way at the very least. Sometimes we want to have them scry on the heroes, but we have to assume they were either doing it all the time, or doing it at just the right time so they could figure out everything there is to know about our heroes in order to get into their heads. But Saundor wasn't watching them from afar for days or weeks or months. He just saw into their minds because they touched his corruption. And so now Matt has a built-in excuse for Saundor to reference anything he wants to. He can confront the heroes about their backstories and their motivations and their flaws. But of course he doesn't confront all of the heroes, does he? No, he focuses on Vex'ahlia. And of course this works for a few reasons. First of all, the Feywild Arc shines a bit of a light on the twins, but mostly, unofficially, serves as a Vax-centric story arc. Between the fact that they're here to find the bow that she can use, to the scene where Vex and Percy talk about what makes her seem noble, to the Saundor encounter that was essentially resolved with Percy's grand gesture, to even something like the broom almost getting disenchanted in the last episode. This is a Vex storyline. So Matt is presenting a villain who is specifically designed to prey upon Vex's insecurities, confronting her with her dark past that she's still ashamed of, in an attempt to paint them both as the same. He's tearing her down and then insisting that he can lift her back up. It's this tactic.
You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing. But not to me.
And some of you might have noticed what sort of person Saundor reminds you of, but in case it wasn't clear, the cartoon added a line to really drive the point home. A comment made by Saundor just after Vex rejected him, and just before the fight actually began. I don't normally do this, I basically never include clips from the cartoon to make my point in these videos, but we're discussing what makes Saundor work as a villain, and this added line really helps get to the heart of the character, no pun intended.
Bitch! You're just like the rest!
He's an incel. He's toxic. I mean, literally he seems to secrete toxic sludge, but also he's emotionally toxic. He's manipulative, he's an emotional abuser, and I'm sure there's even more ways people could describe him based on the actions he takes in the episode that have more experience in that field and more knowledge of all that stuff, so sound off in the comments with the other observations of just how much he sucks. Longtime viewers of this channel will know that I love it when a villain represents real-world villainy, and Saundor does just that. Some people hate it when I use terms like toxic masculinity to describe villains because they think I'm saying masculinity is inherently toxic, which is not what the term means. It's not how words work at all, actually. They'll say things like, Kevdak is just a toxic person. His gender has nothing to do with it. As if the fact that Kevdak comes from a violent civilization dominated by men has nothing at all to do with the culture he now currently surrounds himself with. Like, come on, guys, you're pissing in the discourse kiddie pool while the rest of us are swimming out to the deep end. So at the risk of getting even more of those comments, Saundor also represents toxic masculinity. It's a very different form of it, of course. Saundor has very little in common with Kevdak. Kevdak couldn't handle being questioned and thought he was a great leader who just kept getting betrayed by family members after family member because they were weak and not because he sucked. Saundor, on the other hand, thinks he's the victim, but as we've seen, he's manipulative. In fact, on that subject, here's a little trick for the young kids in the dating scene. If someone is trying to make a connection with you, it's not a good sign when they bring up your multiple murders as a way to paint you as a monster and then claim that you're broken but reinforce that they still care about you. That's abuse, and you deserve better than that. But this is also what makes Saundor work so well in ways that Matt couldn't have expected. Because earlier in this episode, Vax talked with Vex about how she doesn't, or rather she shouldn't, require any external validation in order to feel good about herself. And Percy doubled down on that as well, reminding her that they had just talked about this recently. He has told her already that she's just better than most people. And yet, here comes Saundor, playing on Vex's insecurities, talking about how much she sucks and how he can fix her. The idea that someone else can grant her validation is the same idea that Vax was warning her about earlier in this very episode. Saundor is almost perfectly designed to prey upon Vex's weakness and tempt her to the dark side. And Matt was prepared for the possibility that this would work. Like, literally, she would get tempted to the dark side. Vex would agree to join with him. In fact, Matt had an alternate stat block on hand for a corrupted version of Vex. I don't remember if she would have been forced to fight on his side or how that would have worked exactly. But on Monday, I'm going to release a video about how these sorts of offers might work in your games. Essentially asking, is there a way to encourage or better tempt your players to take a deal with the Fae or a hag or the devil? In this case, the main thing Saundor is offering, besides companionship and someone who claims to get Vex, but he's also offering her the power to protect her home. That's just one of several tactics you can employ to make these sorts of deals a lot more enticing in your campaigns, but again, we'll discuss that a lot more on Monday. But Laura is still conflicted about Saundor, but thankfully, Percy/Taliesin and Keyleth/Marisha are in her corner, backing her up and reinforcing that Saundor sucked, and she should not feel bad for attacking him. And now we get to see if Saundor's mechanics measure up to his narrative and metaphorical potential, because it's initiative, and here are the highlights. Matt lays out the arena, and that really is all it is. It's a circular arena that represents the inside of the tree. There's a root in the middle of the tree that stretches up through this area to the ceiling, but otherwise it's essentially just a coliseum. Now, Matt will have some layer actions in this fight as well, but next week I'm actually going to talk about some of the lessons we can learn from the MCDM book of villain layers, Where Evil Lives, because there might be a lot for us to discuss in regards to how to make a great layer that has a bit more going on than this, without making it so complex that you have trouble managing it during combat. Percy is able to use a trick shot to get Saundor to drop Fenthras to the ground. That's a great little tactic. One of Matt's layer actions goes off, hitting the party with a cloud of poisonous gas, which makes sense for a swamp layer. I like that one. Saundor is able to use 2 legendary actions to cast a spell, but Scanlan counterspells it. On his turn, Saundor scoops up the bow and then sinks into the ground and emerges elsewhere in the arena, which is great because, as we'll see, if Matt keeps the villain moving, that will provoke the party to keep moving as well. He's also leaning out of the wall of the tree now, 30 feet up in the air, which is also really smart if you're Saundor, using a bow to attack, because you want to maintain your distance from the party. Saundor then attacks the party with thorny arrows that he fires through Fenthras, which, again, makes sense. If you're trying to get a cool bow from a bad guy, then the bad guy should use that bow in combat. His arrows erupt into vines that try to grapple the targets, which is a really cool mechanic for a fight where your villain is moving a lot. He's trying to trap the heroes in place and keep them at a distance, which, again, makes perfect sense because he is a ranged attacker, so he really wants to control the party's positioning on the battlefield. If he can lock them down, then that works great for him. Keyleth casts Tree Stride and then becomes a fire elemental and jumps into one of the tree ents, setting it on fire and then attacking it from the inside. Saundor hits a party with the reverse gravity spell. They fly up 50 feet and hit the ceiling, and then they fall back down again and slam into the ground. Oof, rough. The layer also sprouts vines to try to grapple the party and hold them in place as another layer action. Grog tries running around trying to get to Saundor by climbing up the vines on the wall. And then he also howls and calls out to Ukurat, their werewolf ally. However, before Grog can get to him, Saundor shifts into the trees again and reemerges halfway across the arena, out from where the wall meets the ceiling.
I will also heal Vax. She's close enough, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
With an inspirational quote.
No.
Something Percival once said a long time ago.
I'm ready.
Oh,
Life needs things to live. That's it. That's the whole quote. Earlier tonight. Percival von Frederickstein von Rollo de Frankenstein de Rollo. Credit where credit is due.
Keyleth loses concentration on Tree Stride, so she doesn't actually get a chance to go back and forth between the evil tree ants. But don't worry, she is still a fire elemental fighting a tree guy. She's cleaning house. Saundor hits Vex with a blight spell. He seems to be focusing on her a lot. I wonder why.
sure.
Jesus.
Thunder strikes outside the trees.
What's that?
That was Travis hitting the
too big
side
for
of the
this world.
room.
There's another burst of fog, which seems designed to mess with the senses of the heroes, but they all resist it. And then Ukurat breaks into the lair and starts heading towards Saundor. I've got a villain coming out next Monday about bringing NPC allies into battle, with a special focus on groups of NPC allies, as if the party had recruited maybe more than just one werewolf. Keep an eye out for that video soon, and I guess a little more than a week. Grog tries to Tarzan swing over to Saundor since he's barely been able to do anything in this fight. But he rolls a 1, the vine snaps, he hits the ground. Poor Travis is having a really rough battle. Saundor fires arrows into Vex and knocks her unconscious, and then emerges from another part of the wall near where Grog was a minute ago. Like, that's a little bit frustrating. I mean, obviously he wouldn't have gone back there if Grog was still over there, everyone knows that intellectually, but On an emotional level, yeah, it's a little frustrating to leave an area to go chase the bad guy, and then the bad guy goes back to the area you just left. Like, it feels like Grog's running in circles. But of course, that also still works for the scene. Like, it's not actually unfair, but it does feel like lemon in the wound when Grog hasn't been able to get close enough to take a full turn of attacks all fight long. But that also does feel like something the little asshole like Saundor would do, doesn't it? Scanlan heals Vex and then uses Bigby's hand to throw Keyleth at Saundor, but he's too far away. She just barely does not get close enough to grab onto him. Saundor hits Vex with a Blight again. Vex unleashes Sheathus' wings and flies up to Saundor's face to help intercept any future attacks on Vex. Considering there are no allies near Saundor, Vex is not going to get sneak attack on these, but it's worth it to him to protect his sister. Grog picks himself up and then mocks Saundor for not being able to get over a breakup. Then he hurls the Javelin of Lightning at Saundor, dealing just 12 points of damage, and finishing Saundor off. And everyone laughs about how Grog barely got to do anything. He's been running around from one side of the arena to the other, and yet he's the one who gets the kill. It's honestly really funny. Ukrat says their debt is settled and recommends they leave the Feywild before they stumble into any more unexpected dangers. I can't help but feel like this is also Matt's nudge to get them to travel back home in this episode, so we don't get an entire episode-long denouement like we did after the Umbrasyl fight. I mean, I could be wrong, but I do think that's what Matt is doing, nudging his players to get back to the main story. However, there are still some loose story threads left to resolve before they leave the Feywild, so over the next 20 minutes, we essentially get a coda to the Feywild Arc. Ukrat bids them adieu. He's going to go help his people find a new home elsewhere in the Feywild. Keyleth tells Vex that nobody should tell her that she needs them in order to be great.
But he was an asshole.
Oh yeah, he was really, right?
And I don't want you ever dating an asshole.
Thank you.
He wasn't good enough. He was mean.
I'm gonna saunter over.
What?
We're a lot of lies, you and I.
What an asshole.
You
Jesus.
drug your friends to the tune.
Grog takes Vax aside and asks about that bloody dagger Saundor mentioned, and Liam confesses that he didn't understand anything Matt said as Saundor due to the Skype connection and the voice Matt was using. Liam picked up a lot of it through context clues, but didn't track whatever Grog is referencing specifically. He doesn't know what bloody dagger Grog is referring to. And interestingly, I don't believe this is ever revisited by the characters in the campaign. It's a shame because it would have been nice to see a scene where another character unpacked Vex's feelings of guilt about those deaths. But as a bit of a counterpoint, do we really need that scene? Or was this moment from Percy and Keyleth maybe enough? Because in that moment, they essentially diffused any argument that Vex could lend any credence at all to what Saundor was saying about her, by pointing out that he was a weird little creep, so fuck him. They look to see if there's anything else worth stealing, and Matt essentially says, no, but what you do notice is a nice way to sort of tell them that they're still getting something, even though you're also giving them nothing. But what they do notice is the sludge is slowing down. It's essentially stopped and solidified, almost like amber. Keyleth casts Commune with Nature and feels a wave of relaxation from the surrounding plant life. And there is no trace of Saundor. Again, that is a great detail from Matt, to demonstrate that nature is healing, or at the very least, the corruption has stopped being generated now that Saundor is gone. At this point, the party starts to leave, although they do discuss maybe popping by the hut or going to the theater. Then they hear someone doing a slow clap. A tall fae with exaggerated elven features and bright red hair. He thanks them for the entertainment over the past few days. This is Garmelie, or rather, Garmelie's true form, Artagan. Scanlan casts Oluk's resilient sphere around him, and Artagan doesn't seem too bothered. But in a moment, he does ask Scanlan to drop the ball so he can go on with his day, so maybe he actually was affected by this. It's hard to say. He asks what's next for the party, and when they say they're going to go kill a dragon, he reminds them not to underestimate a dragon's intelligence. Keep an eye on that. That is not the last time Matt's going to say that over the next couple episodes. Vex asks about the little onyx dog statuette he pickpocketed, and he confesses that he just wanted a companion. The dog will come to life if they find the right words. He's not going to tell them what those words are. He says, do some research, you'll figure it out.
You know, for someone who hates the theater, you've made quite a show of all of this.
Oh man, that was a 10.
That's good. That's good, Keyleth.
Yep. Touche, Keyleth. Touche. But no, seriously, I fucking hate the theater.
He asks, double checks, and makes sure that they did avoid the hut he warned them about. And when they refer to the woman inside the hut as a hag, he's a bit bemused by that. He says she is many things, but she's not a hag. He also refers to her as his ex, and that's fun. I'm rooting for those two. He bids them goodbye, but he would love to see them again. The Feywild gets so boring, and they are so much more interesting and more fun. He vanishes, and the party holds hands and casts plane shift to travel back to Whitestone. And that is the end of the episode and the end of the Feywild Arc. Overall, I think Matt did stick the landing, and I was really worried, actually, that going back and seeing Saundor might be a bit disappointing and underwhelming, considering that he's kind of hinted at, but not really present as a force throughout this campaign or throughout the story arc. But I do think that Matt is still able to deliver something really satisfying with this villain at the end of the episode, and at the end of this arc, that makes it still rewarding and fulfilling. So kudos to him for that. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back in 2 weeks to discuss episode 64, The Frigid Doom. One question I get a lot in this series is whether this is going to spoil the events of the animated series before the new season starts, and truthfully, I don't really know what the creators are going to do about this next coming plot point. We might see some of this next episode appear in the new season, but it's definitely going to be radically different. There is no way it's going to be anything like what happened in the live stream. Because in the next episode of the Vox Machina campaign, at long last, 25 episodes into the Chroma Conclave arc, the party decides to go check on Draconia, to see if there are any allies left to be found, and to see how Tiberius and his family are doing. And there is so much that happens in this episode, and we are going to have a ton to talk about. And I don't think it's going to spoil anything in the cartoon, because obviously Tiberius is not a presence. I don't think Draconia is a presence, but this is a cannot miss episode of the live stream. Be here for that in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, like I said, I've got some other videos coming out between now and then that are actually sort of spiritual sequels to this video, expanding on some of the themes we discussed around Saundor, a video about supernatural beings offering deals to player characters, a video about villains layers, and a video about bringing NPCs with you into the fray. So if you want to see those videos, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. Once again, please consider supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi or becoming a YouTube member. There is absolutely no worry if that's not within your budget or if it's not something you're interested in doing, but if there's any chance that you're able to lend a little extra support, I would definitely appreciate it. I'd also love if you could join my Discord server. It's a really lovely community and all are welcome. And also sign up for my newsletter for some exciting updates, hopefully more exciting than what I talked about in this video. Make sure you're registered to vote. This year's election is going to be a whole thing. Click here to check out my video about all of D&D's incredible alternate covers and why I'm never going to buy one, but that doesn't mean they're bad. Until next time, play fair and have fun.